The 2023 shoe year started off strong with the release of the Endorphin Elite. But now, 9 months later, how has the shoe held up? It's time to lace up the Saucony Endorphin Elite one more time and talk about them after 100 miles. Yo, what's going on everybody? My name is Kofuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews shoes here on YouTube, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about the Saucony Endorphin Elite. But before I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that Saucony sent to me for the purpose of review, so I did not have to pay for these shoes. However, they're not paying me to make this video, and they're not going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Saucony Endorphin Elite. Now, I've already made an initial review video where I go over a lot of the specs and use cases for it, but today what I want to talk about in this long-term follow-up is if that use case has changed for me over time, in other words, how I've been using the shoe, and I'm also going to talk about how the shoe has been holding up over the wear and tear of the last 100 miles. And then I'll wrap up and update some of my recommendations for pairing options and alternatives to consider when you're talking about the Endorphin Elite. So first, let's talk about how I've been using the shoe. Now, I've done a lot of marathon effort miles in my early testing of the shoe, but since then, I've pretty much focused in on doing only threshold mile repeats, my kind of bread and butter workout that I do most of the time. And I've been really enjoying using it for that purpose. I feel like the Power Run HG foam that they're using in the Saucony Endorphin Elite, it has a really nice combination of lightness, squishiness, and it compresses really well, but it also springs back not only with a good amount of force, but also in a really nice amount of timing. So like kind of not only the amount of squish and travel that the shoe has is nice, but also like kind of like the dynamics of it, like how quickly does it spring back. That also really works well for me, not only at the marathon effort miles that I put into it early in the life of the shoe, but also at the threshold levels of effort that I've been putting into the shoe much more recently. Even though I personally haven't had the pleasure of racing in this shoe for this year, I do think that is going to be an excellent marathon racing shoe or half marathon racing shoe for a lot of you out there. And for some of you, it might even be a really great 10K racer as well, because even though the shoe is a big shoe, it's very lightweight, especially since they've trimmed down so much on the upper and are using a very lightweight foam. It's something that's not going to bog you down when you're trying to get those legs turned over. Now, let's talk about how the shoe's been holding up for me over the last 100 miles or well. And first I'll start off with some of the kind of like issues that I had in my early review. And the first thing is that the upper made me bleed my own blood a little bit on some of my early running in the shoe. This material that they're using for the upper is very breathable and very strong, but is also a little bit abrasive. And so on some of those early runs, it was kind of rubbing the top of my toes, or at least the way that my foot was sitting inside the shoe. I felt like my toes were kind of curling themselves up. They weren't bunched in. There's plenty of space, but I still found myself kind of like gripping down on the shoe with my toes. And so that caused the knuckles to sit up a little bit, and that caused a little bit of bleeding. Now, I don't know if it's that the upper material has mellowed out a little bit. Maybe the foam has mellowed out, so my toes aren't doing that thing inside the shoe anymore or what. But after that first time where the shoe made me bleed a little bit, I haven't had any issues with the upper at all. And in fact, I do find that now at the 100-mile mark, this upper is one of the more comfortable uppers that I've tested in 2023. Saucony usually makes really fantastic uppers for their racing shoes. And while this is probably one of the less comfortable because of the rough nature of the material, it still fits me really well, and it gives me enough room in all the places where I need it, and my toes don't feel like they're getting crushed in this shoe. So that problem has seemed to mellow itself out. Now, the next problem that I ran into with this shoe was that the speed roll, or the point at which the shoe kind of starts to curl upward, felt like it was at an unusual spot for me, kind of like right under the pads in my feet, in a way such that when I was hitting the ground in my foot strike, all the force seemed to be hitting kind of like at a bulge and pushing right up into the pads in my feet. It wasn't every time that this was happening, but every once in a while, I kind of felt like it was extra firm or an extra kind of like punch up from the ground into my foot. Now, I don't really feel like I feel that anymore. In fact, one of the things that I've kind of noticed gradually over the months in running in this shoe is that even though this shoe still looks like it's very aggressive in terms of how sharply the front of the shoe curls up, in terms of what I'm feeling underfoot, it feels like it's kind of mellowed out more and more. So I feel like either my foot has subconsciously figured out where to land when I'm running in this shoe, or more likely, I feel like there's just a little bit of extra compression that happened in that part of the shoe that has mellowed it out a little bit. So it doesn't feel quite as harsh of a transition from kind of like the main flat part of the shoe into the forefoot. And so what's ending up now is that I'm just getting kind of like a nice roll off in the shoe from where it hits the ground. So I'm very happy to report that that part of the shoe that I thought might be a problem didn't end up being a problem for me at all. Now, in terms of like the wear and tear on the upper, I already talked about it a little bit, how I feel like the materials are kind of loosening up just a little bit, but it's still feeling like a very snug fit, a racer fit, which is what you want in a racing shoe. But I don't feel like any of the materials are too loose, too stretchy, overstretched, and nothing is wearing down prematurely. So the upper, aside from the little blood stain that I have on mine, looks absolutely fantastic. There is a little bit more visual wear on the bottom of the shoe, and that's going to be probably most apparent in this part of the shoe, this medial side, where there isn't a little strip of rubber here. And I know a lot of you guys have been wondering about why that isn't there or how bad that's going to be for the shoe. And for me, surprisingly, I can show you here that even though it's an exposed racing foam, it's holding up really well. There's certainly scuff marks in there, and it's certainly dirty, but the little etchings that are in the foam are still there and visible when you're looking at that foam. So it's showing me that, like, even though there is a little bit of scuffing, it hasn't ground down, it hasn't worn away. There's no chewed up pock marks in that midsole foam, so it's actually holding up surprisingly well. And I can also say the same thing for the rubber that's on the outsole here. It's a very thin layer of rubber that's here with not any like lugs or tread that's on here, but cutouts and a little bit of like grooves etched into the rubber as well to enhance some of that grip. And I'm still seeing a lot of the fine detail in the rubber, which is proof to me that like the whole surface of the rubber outsole hasn't worn down all that far yet. So this rubber is holding up really well, even though I've spent most of my time running relatively fast and putting in a lot more speed into the shoe than I would for, say, a daily trainer. Now let's move on to the portion of the video where I talk about some pairing options in case you want to build a rotation around the Endorphin Elite. And then we'll talk about the buying guide now that the shoe's been out for a little while, and talk about some of the competition. And I've already gone over some options, both in terms of pairing options and alternatives or competitors to this shoe. And I'm going to update them here with a couple of additional thoughts now that we've had some more miles in all the other shoes that have been out in 2023. Now, if you're going to race in the Endorphin Elite, I think a really fun daily trainer is going to be the ASICS Glide Ride 3. Now, this shoe actually came out in 2022, but it hasn't been updated yet, so this is the most recent Glide Ride. And it's a shoe that I've just started thinking about again recently and remembering it fondly. It's got a really fun, squishy foam. It's got a little bit of a channel in the bottom to help kind of guide the foot forward, and has some of that natural stability built into it because it has a little bit of a wider footprint. A lot of similar things that I could say that's going on in the Endorphin Elite. So if you're like racing in the Endorphin Elite, I think a fun shoe to take out for your easy runs and some of your recovery runs is going to be the Glide Ride 3. And then if you have some fartlek sessions, something's in between where you would use an easy day shoe and where you might use a racing shoe, I feel like a good session shoe or speedwork shoe that you could pick up is a Puma DV8 Nitro 2. This has got a layer of Puma's Nitro Elite foam in it, and it's got a carbon fiber plate, so it can be used for some of the easy runs and it's comfortable for that, but it can also pick up the pace really nicely. So I feel like these three shoes together can make for a really nice triplet of shoes as you get ready for that next big race. Now let's talk about some of the pricing and competition. It's been 9 months since the Endorphin Elite has been released, and the price on it is still the same, $275, which makes it one of the most expensive racing shoes on the market today. Let's take a look at some of the competition. One of the shoes that I mentioned earlier as a good alternative, and I still think is a good alternative, is the Adidas Adios Pro 3. It's got a full stack of Light Strike Pro racing foam and carbon fiber energy rods that are in here. They both have a really great racing sensation and are going to be fun for both marathon racing, half marathon racing, maybe 10K racing, but also a big bulk of your workouts. I still think that is going to be a really nice competitor, and I still think that there is a very different kind of squish dynamic to the Adios Pro 3. It compresses a lot, but it springs back really quickly, almost giving a sense of firmness to that bouncy foam. And so that's going to be the main difference between it. And I think the Adios Pro 3 might be a little bit twitchier of a shoe, so it's not quite a set it and forget it shoe like the Endorphin Elite can be. Now, the other alternative to the Endorphin Elite is not something I would normally kind of discuss because it's not really a shoe you can even buy anymore because it's a little bit of an older shoe. But when I made the first Endorphin Elite video, it's something that you guys asked me about over and over again. And I do think that it is a good alternative or a shoe worth comparing to, because if nothing else, a lot of you guys have familiarity with this shoe already, and that's going to be the Alphafly version 1. And because we're on version 2 now and version 3 is coming up, I think early next year in 2024, getting pairs of the Alphafly version 1 is getting more and more difficult. But I think both of these shoes are trying to accomplish similar things in similar ways. They're using really great foams that are very lightweight and very squishy, but bouncy at the same time. And they both put a lot of cushion right at the pads of the feet. And I would say the biggest difference to me in these two shoes is that I think that the Alphafly one, those Zoom air pockets, I think it compresses and decompresses a little bit slower. So you're getting more of a cushioned feeling in that shoe, whereas in the Endorphin Elite, I feel like it squishes and decompresses a little bit faster. So it's a little bit poppier of a shoe. So a lot of it's going to come down to preference in terms of which one you want. The Endorphin Elite feels a little bit more aggressive. The Alphafly one feels a little bit more chill. Both are going to be really great for running fast marathons and half marathons. I don't really have a price to give you for the Alphafly one because it's not really for sale at any primary retail. You're pretty much going to be looking at the secondary market. So those are my thoughts on the Endorphin Elite after 100 miles. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions, or better yet, stop by the live stream to do Monday through Friday over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to talk to you guys in the chat. That's all for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?